Discuss this, we can now cross live to independent journalist Rania Khalek. Rania, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So, why was a key Turkish ally given such short notice of the attacks? And could you say that Ankara is trying to hide its intentions?
Well, first of all, the U.S. military spokesperson that was just speaking called Turkey a partner in the fight against ISIS, and Turkey's been anything but a partner in the fight against ISIS. In fact, it's because of Turkey that ISIS even was able to form in Syria, because they allowed all of these foreign jihadists to cross their border. And now you've got a situation where you're seeing the outcome of reckless U.S. policy. The U.S. has been funding so many different sides in this war in Syria, and now they've been funding the Kurds, which have been fighting ISIS and other jihadist groups. Meanwhile, Turkey is able to get away with basically whatever it wants, with nothing but a slap on the wrist. I highly doubt you'll see any consequences other than these very tepid statements from U.S. officials saying they're troubled or deeply concerned by the fact that Turkey is bombing forces the U.S. has spent money and time training to fight ISIS. But at the end of the day, Turkey is anything but a partner in the fight against ISIS, and this is not the first time this has happened. The U.S. has funded several different proxy sides in this war, and they keep killing each other.
Well, let's look at how things could be affected on the ground. How do you think the Turkish airstrikes affect the Kurds' fight against IS in Syria and Iraq?
Well, it completely undermines the fight against ISIS, and that's really troubling, because at the end of the day, that's what the SDF and the Peshmerga, who the Turks have been targeting, are fighting. And this is not, again, this is not the first time Turkey's been doing this. Turkey has been aiming its fire and its proxies at not just the Kurds, but also the Syrian army. And so everything that Turkey has done in Syria has, more than anything else, really empowered ISIS, especially in northern Syria. And this is just going to make the fight against ISIS even more difficult, because you're getting, Turkey's essentially eliminating fighters that are devoted to fighting ISIS.
Well, let's look at earlier events. The US has already deployed tanks to Syria to prevent Kurds and Turks from fighting. Why isn't Washington able to control its own allies?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm not really. I don't think Washington is. I think this is a reckless policy, and I don't think Washington is prepared to do anything about it, because they still depend on Turkey to help undermine the Syrian government. This just speaks to the fact that the U.S. policy in Syria is and has been extremely contradictory, and in many ways just schizophrenic. Where on the one hand you have the U.S. training people who are fighting ISIS, and on the other hand, its #1 ally in that area, Turkey, is doing everything it can to undermine that fight. And the U.S. response is very, very weak, because I guess there's little they can do, because they depend on Turkey, because that's one of the few partners that they have to leverage against the Syrian government. And that the U.S. policy in Syria has always been more towards weakening the Syrian government than actually fighting ISIS or al-Qaeda. That's just kind of been a secondary aim for the U.S.
Well, picking up on that point, the US has called on Turkey to respect Iraqi sovereignty, but nothing's been said about Syria. Why do you think that is?
Well, once again, it's because the U.S. has very little leverage in Syria, and Turkey is one of its few partners on the ground. Its forces are on the ground that are able to consistently push against the Syrian government, or at least continue to make sure the Syrian government stays in a weakened position where it's constantly fighting from several different angles. And so, if the U.S. wants Turkey to play that role, then I guess it can't go in and bash Turkey, or else it's going to lose its one piece of leverage. Because in Syria, that's one of the U.S.'s biggest problems, is it has so little leverage on the ground in that country when it comes to weakening Syria and weakening Iran, which are the broader policy goals that the U.S. is concerned about before it's concerned about ISIS and al-Qaeda. If anything, ISIS and al-Qaeda have been assets and tools that the U.S. has been using in Syria this entire time, and it goes back to the fact that, again, this is a very reckless and contradictory policy, because in Iraq, it's the other way around, where the U.S. is trying to fight ISIS. So it's feeding ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria, and then trying to fight it in Iraq. And then Turkey is just so obsessed with making sure that the Kurds don't win or gain any territory, because that's Turkey's #1 concern, that it's going to continue to cause these problems. And what's really dangerous here is now you have this fight going on between Turkey and the Kurds, and I think that that's probably going to continue to escalate, and no one's really going to do anything about it.
Indeed, a very complex issue. Thank you very much, independent journalist Rania Khalek. Thank you very much.